Look at this. On the left, the man who decides whether you can afford a house. On the right, the man who wants to fire him. In the middle, your mortgage statement. We call this independence. The Federal Reserve was designed to be boring, predictable, immune to politics. But what happens when the guy who prints money works for the guy who wants cheaper gas prices? This isn't a glitch. This is a hack. When politicians control the money printer, you don't get lower interest rates. You get a cheaper dollar. Your savings say $50,000. But what does $50,000 buy in 2026 versus 2020? The restaurant didn't lower prices. They just made the portions smaller. Today, we decode what happens when your central bank gets hijacked. Not by conspiracy, by design. Let me show you the blueprint. 1907. Banks are collapsing. The entire financial system is held together by one man's personal fortune, J.P. Morgan. Congress realizes we can't rely on a billionaire every time markets crash. So in 1913, they create the Federal Reserve. Critical design choice. Fed chair serves a 14-year term. Presidents serve 4-year terms. Why? Politicians want cheap money today. Economists want stable money forever. The 14-year term was the firewall. 1979. Inflation is 13%. The dollar is collapsing. The new Fed chair is Paul Volcker. President Carter asks him to go easy before the election. Volcker says no. President Reagan asks him to lower rates. Volcker says no. He raises interest rates to 20%. Mortgages become unaffordable. Unemployment spikes. Politicians are furious. But Volcker doesn't work for politicians. He works for the dollar's credibility. By 1983, inflation is dead. The dollar is trusted again. That's what independence looks like. Compare that to Arthur Burns, who caved to Nixon's pressure in 1972 and gave us 13% inflation. The choice was always clear. Courage equals stability. Compliance equals chaos. For 30 years after Volcker, the firewall held. Presidents came and went. Fed chairs stayed. Until 2018. The blueprint was simple. Long terms outlast short-term political pressure. Independence protects currency credibility. Boring is stable. Stable preserves value. That was version 1.0. Now let's look at what's breaking. 2018. Trump appoints Jerome Powell. Within 6 months, he's attacking him publicly. Powell is raising rates too fast. Powell doesn't understand the economy. Powell should be fired. Legally, he can't fire Powell. But the threat changes the game. 2019, Powell pauses rate hikes despite inflation concerns. 2024, Powell is cautious about aggressive tightening. Why? If he causes a recession, the president weaponizes it. The independence isn't legally broken. It's psychologically compromised. January 2026. Trump announces Kevin Warsh to replace Powell in May. Warsh's credentials are solid. Former Fed governor, Stanford economist. So what's the problem? Look at what he wrote in 2023. Warsh co-authored The New Accord. Thesis: the Fed and Treasury should work together more closely. Translation: break down the firewall. But here's the deeper issue. Warsh believes in supply-side optimization. AI and deregulation can lower inflation without raising rates. That's not data-dependent. That's faith-based monetary policy. What if AI doesn't lower prices fast enough? What if deregulation doesn't boost supply? Then you get cheap money meeting high inflation. That's how currencies collapse. Here's the glitch nobody's talking about. Powell's chair term ends May 2026. But his board term runs until January 2028. What if Powell refuses to leave the board? Then you have Kevin Warsh as chair, Jerome Powell as a voting governor. 2 captains on one ship. This has never happened. Because usually, chairs resign completely. But Powell might stay. Why? If he believes Warsh will tank the dollar's credibility, Powell can vote against him from inside. Picture this. Warsh proposes cutting rates for political reasons. Powell votes no publicly. The Fed splits 6-5. That's not a central bank. That's a reality show. One more critical piece. The new Treasury Secretary is Scott Bessent. Bessent and Warsh have known each other for decades. Same hedge fund. Same academic circles. They both wrote papers advocating Fed Treasury coordination. Now they're running monetary policy and fiscal policy together. Here's why that matters. The Fed owns $2.3 trillion in mortgage-backed securities. That's housing debt. Warsh wants to sell it fast. But if the Fed dumps that much housing debt onto the market, mortgage rates spike, even if the Fed cuts its benchmark rate. So you get this. Bessent borrows trillions for government spending. Warsh keeps base rates low to make that borrowing cheap. But Warsh dumps mortgage bonds to normalize the balance sheet. Result: credit card rates drop. Government debt stays affordable. But your 30-year mortgage rate stays high or rises. The system protects government borrowing. You get squeezed. 4 glitches, 1 system. Political threats compromise independence psychologically. Warsh's faith-based policy replaces data-dependent analysis. Powell might stay as governor, creating internal civil war. Bessent-Warsh coordination breaks the Treasury-Fed firewall, while dumping mortgage costs onto middle-class homebuyers. The blueprint isn't just cracked. It's being rewritten in real time. So why is this happening? Let's dig 3 levels deep. Surface answer. Trump wants lower rates because high rates hurt his re-election chances. Simple political pressure. But politicians have always wanted cheap money. So why does it work now when it didn't work on Volcker? In 1980, when Volcker raised rates to 20%, U.S. debt was $900 billion. Painful, but manageable. In 2026, U.S. debt is $36 trillion. Every 1% rate increase costs $360 billion in annual interest, more than the entire defense budget. The trap. The Fed can't raise rates high enough to kill inflation without bankrupting the government. Politicians know this. That's why Trump can threaten Powell. Powell can't actually use the Volcker playbook. The debt is too big. Root cause. Politicians operate on 4-year cycles. Economic consequences operate on 10-year cycles. When you print money today, inflation takes 18 to 24 months to show up. By then, the election is over. This creates a structural incentive. Every president wants to juice the economy during their term. The bill comes due under the next guy. So they all do it. Debt compounds. Until the system can't afford to fix itself. The Fed was designed to break this cycle. 14-year terms meant Fed chairs could say no to short-term sugar. But when debt gets this big, that no becomes economically impossible. Politicians realize the Fed is trapped. And a trapped Fed can be controlled. Here's the machine. Step 1. Political sugar high. Threaten the Fed, get cheap money, stock market rallies. Win re-election. Step 2. Debt trap. Cheap money creates inflation. To fight inflation, you need high rates. But high rates make debt unpayable. Step 3. Currency collapse. Print more money to service debt. Dollar weakens. Purchasing power erodes. Then repeat. This isn't a bug. This is the hack working exactly as designed. Short term, lower rates, rising stocks, low unemployment. Long term, dollar loses credibility. Inflation returns. Purchasing power collapses. You traded stable money for cheap money. The system got 4 more years in office. You got a currency optimized for elections, not retirement savings. You're not confused about why mortgage rates won't drop? The Fed is being hacked in real time. Powell says data dependent. Warsh says supply side optimism. Trump says you're too slow. Bessent prints treasury bonds. Warsh buys them with printed money. The system is being optimized for election cycles, not your purchasing power. So what do? We become glitches in their system. 2 cheat codes. Cheat 1. The fixed rate window. When Warsh takes over in May 2026, there might be a brief rate drop. That's your window. Refinance variable rate debt into fixed rate. Lock in cheap money before the MBS dump spikes long-term rates. If you're shopping for a mortgage, understand this. Base rates might fall, but mortgage rates might not follow. Because the Fed is flooding the market with housing debt. Fixed rate is your shield against this paradox. Cheat 2. The purchasing power backup. Your 401k number might go up, but if milk costs $8 a gallon, did you win? Move 10 to 20% of savings into assets politicians can't print. Gold, Bitcoin, real estate in supply-constrained areas. These aren't investments. These are backups for when the dollar glitches. In a cheap money environment with political Fed control, the dollar becomes a bet, not a certainty. Diversify accordingly. The Federal Reserve was designed to be boring. Boring is stable. Stable preserves value. Value builds middle-class wealth. But boring doesn't win elections. The blueprint is being hacked. Not by conspiracy, by incentive. Politicians want cheap money today. The bill comes in 10 years. They'll be gone by then. Now that you can see the invisible trade-off, will you keep your savings in a system optimized for re-election? Or will you move them to assets that can't be hacked by a tweet? The Fed can't save you, but you can save yourself. End of report.